Our Around the World segment tonight, North Korea is looking for trouble. Those were the words of President Trump after North Korea threatened U.S. yet again. North Korea said it would counter reckless acts of aggression with whatever methods the U.S. wants to take. This came in response to the deployment of a U.S. naval strike group to the Korean peninsula. Take a look at it.
Pyongyang has criticised the United States after President Trump ordered a US Navy battle group to deploy in waters off the Korean peninsula. North Korea warned of catastrophic consequences if Washington continued its provocation. On the streets of the capital, people reacted to the increased tensions. We're not scared, we love peace, but we are never going to beg for it. If anyone tries to provoke us, we'll defend ourselves in the strongest way with our own power, and we will keep doing things our way. The US doesn't care about rocket tests of its allies like the puppets in South Korea and the Japanese reactionaries do them. I think that the US has no reason to complain about what our military does for self-defense.
Joining me now, global risk analyst John Sitilides. John, good to see you.
Pleasure to be with you, Liz.
All right, John, tell me what you make of this. I want to show Trump's tweet on the screen, and I'll read it. It says, North Korea is looking for trouble. If China decides to help, that would be great. If not, we will solve the problem without them. USA. What do you make of that, John?
Well, I think we're seeing the end of the Obama administration's strategic patience policy towards North Korea. And what I think President Trump is doing now, along with his foreign policy team, is putting together an array of tools to be able to persuade the North Koreans, mostly through China, very interestingly, that the policies it's been undertaking over the last 10 to 12 years have got to come to an end. And we see much of this coming out of the dinner that President Trump had last week with Xi Jinping, where China seems to be adopting a very different policy now towards North Korea, not only ending the import of North Korean coal beginning the day after the dinner last week, but also having the communist newspaper, the Global Times, issue a direct threat to North Korea that if they engaged in any further nuclear tests, that the Chinese government itself would be prepared to use military force to prevent North Korea from further aggression on the peninsula.
Right, and I guess that's where I want to dive into this a little bit, because there's been some conflicting messages coming from China, I think. In one sense, they give a statement like that, but they also say that they're only willing or interested in cooperating with the U.S. and addressing North Korea if it's peaceful. They say they don't want refugees flooding across their border from North Korea to China. So can this be solved in a peaceful way?
I don't know. I mean, this is maybe one of the most extraordinarily difficult issues that anyone is dealing with around the world. But think about the way that President Trump has successfully reframed this issue so that it's not simply a matter of the United States versus North Korea anymore. He's very successfully persuaded China to come into the mix, and with the tweet that you mentioned earlier, challenging China on the global stage to take charge of this issue in a way that really only China can, both in terms of political tools, economic tools, and now including the possibility of military tools. Not that anyone anticipates a strike against North Korea, because the consequences could be devastating against Seoul, South Korea, Tokyo, Japan, and other major cities and population centers in Northeast Asia. But the Chinese have to begin to own this issue. And we've just heard today that President Trump was able to offer to Premier Xi Jinping more sort of sweeter concessions in possible trade relations and trade negotiations between the U.S. and China in exchange for China taking the necessary measures now to influence North Korea in a way that the U.S. and any other party is simply unable to, short of military means.
Right, and listen, I mean, with all due respect to President Trump, maybe this is his opportunity to showcase what a good negotiator he is, because I got to tell you, John, I don't fully trust China here. I mean, this has been building up in North Korea for years, even decades. I mean, Kim Jong-un is not a rational actor. We're not dealing with a nation who has a grasp on reality here. He doesn't quite differentiate between what's real and what's fantasy, particularly when it comes to the U.S. So how can we trust China to do anything, to act, even in tandem with the U.S., if they've let it get to this point without acting this far?
Well, it's not a matter of trusting China, Liz. I would say it's a matter of persuading China that it's a very different international landscape now under a Trump administration than what the Chinese enjoyed for the last 8 years. And I think the resolve that President Trump is showing is very effective by sending the Carl Vinson fleet, the flotilla of U.S. warships, to the Korean Peninsula, diverting it from Australia and sending it up to that part of the Pacific Rim region. Also, a number of economic sanctions that we're looking at now, with Congressman Ed Royce's bill from the last Congress possibly being reintroduced to sanction hundreds, perhaps thousands of Chinese companies that are doing business with North Korea legally and, for that matter, illegally, and basically punishing China in where it hurts the most, economically, in ways that Xi Jinping cannot afford to allow to take place while China is undergoing a major economic slowdown. So I think the Trump administration, President Trump's team in the National Security Council, the Defense Department, and the State Department are very wise looking at an array of instruments here to try to achieve a diplomatic solution with China in the mix, as opposed to China just sitting back and letting the U.S. having to deal with a very difficult situation to no avail. So I think President Trump is handling this very masterfully to date, and I think much of this emanates from the strikes against Syria last week at the same precise time he was enjoying dinner with Xi Jinping, about as clear a signal as possible to the Chinese, to the North Koreans, and to the world that it's a very different national security policy undertaken by the Trump administration than anything the world saw the last 8 years.
Right, because even if North Korea didn't fully understand the meaning of the strikes in Syria, I think, like you said, the Chinese president, he certainly did. At the time I said it was a power move by Trump, and I think it was. John, I appreciate your analysis. Very insightful. Thanks for being here.